So recently I've been on a bit of a break from making videos because I'm tired. However, Tom over at AATV has not, and he's been surging ahead making loads of awesome loadout videos, meaning he's got loads of views and loads of subscribers, which I haven't got, and I think that's unsporting of him. So I need to come up with a way of sabotaging his efforts to make a new video. I have an idea. Hey Tom, I know you're really busy doing more of your awesome loadout videos, but corporate just called and they really need your help. They need you to find the difference between this picture and this picture.
I can already see a difference.
They're the same picture. Hello and welcome to, as the title above mine and Tom's head says, Innovation in Airsoft video. We're not actually innovating. I don't think either of us have the capacity to innovate at the moment. It's too hot for me. And Tom, I think you're on rest and recuperation at the moment.
I am indeed. Doctor's orders.
So yes, welcome back to the channel, Tom from AATV. A small channel, help him out, guys. And so recently, Ares and Systema have both released. Well, I guess Systema is properly released, and you can now buy a new type of gearbox. And Ares have been teasing a new type of gearbox, and I thought it'd be good to talk about. Well, actually, these are quite innovative new designs. How often do we actually see innovation in airsoft? So I have a plan. No doubt it'll go out the window in a minute, but let's start things off at the beginning and ask the very narrow and very easy to answer question, which is, why is the airsoft industry so slow at modernising? And I mean, this isn't just gearbox design. This is everything. I mean, we're still using mini TAMs, which is widely known to be kind of a subpar connector. I have seen them burn out on even rental guns running NIMS. And there is I guess the push to move to Deans or as what are we calling it, the T-plug initiative? Is it the T-plug initiative?
I call it Deans because all T-plug are doing is using an expired pattern.
Yeah. So Deans connectors, which are the little red T-shaped connectors.
But they've been around forever as well.
They've been around forever, and they are pretty much in every aspect much better than mini TAMs. But yet we still see new guns coming out today with mini TAMs on it. Why is that?
The easy answer is airsoft is a really small industry. Okay, and when you're in an activity, obviously it's everything to you. You think it's really big, but if I think airsoft globally, I don't have a number. I suspect Games Workshop probably makes more money globally by themselves than the entire airsoft industry.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like, airsoft is still a very small part of the kind of UK hobby scene, and the UK is probably one of the bigger countries for airsoft in the world.
Probably in terms of market penetration, yeah.
I mean, we have quite a few stores here, quite a few sites, quite a lot of players. I'm not sure. I guess we could ask the UCARA database how many active registered skirmishers they have.
I believe, and this could be completely erroneous data. It's somewhere around 50 to 60,000 people registered with UCARA. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually active skirmishers.
And also, there will be people who aren't registered with UCARA who could fall under the active skirmisher bracket. But 50 to 60,000, that's not many people, really, when you think about it.
Yeah. No, not compared to other stuff. You look at road cycling or mountain biking or many other activities. It's really not going to the pub. It's really not a big industry, and I think globally it's really not a big industry compared to other stuff, which we'll probably come into, like RC cars or drones or other electronics, where you're talking millions upon millions upon millions of people. And so the level of investment in that technology and in those hobbies is going to be orders of magnitude above the level of investment into airsoft.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess actually what we see is a lot of the times the innovations that come into airsoft have been piggybacked off of innovations that have happened in other hobbies probably a decade or more before they're seen in airsoft.
Yeah. So what we're getting now is brushless motors is a big thing. I've got some from Warhead that I'm currently testing, and there'll be a video out on my channel soon. But that tech's been in RC cars for donkey's years, and it's only just coming into Airsoft now.
I mean, I built myself a drone almost 10 years ago now, and that was using brushless motors, and that wasn't considered to be a new tech at the time. I mean, drones have been around for probably another 5 years before I built mine, and brushless motors have been around for at least another 5 to 10 years before that. So to see them coming in now, that means effectively we're almost 20 years behind the point where RC hobbyists have been. And yet we're seeing this as cutting edge stuff and all freaky voodoo magic.
Yep. And then we're looking at our current FCUs, so our fire control units, what people call MOSFETs, so the in-gearbox electronics. That's probably the last 5 years at the most. Certainly the last few years. Before now, we've got the big fully featured boards, the Titans and the Leviathans and the Perrons and that kind of stuff. Again, that's been going on in other RC tech industries forever. But suddenly it's a big thing over here now.
I mean, when it comes down to it, it may seem like a really complex system, but really it's a bunch of switches, a microcontroller, and some MOSFETs. And speaking from an electronics point of view, that's pretty basic stuff.
Yeah, but it takes an electronic engineer. It takes investment in the boards. It takes all of it. It takes money and skill to do so. And in a small industry, money and a breadth of skill is just not particularly available. I guess now more so now, but
yeah, you could look at for instance, I mean, you don't need to keep an electronic engineer on payroll all the time if you're Ares or some other airsoft manufacturer. So you could go to a consultancy, but even then, that's going to be really expensive. I should know I work for an electronics consultancy, and I'm pretty much cannon fodder there, and I'm still charged out at $1,000 a day. So, that's going to be a month's worth of time. So that's you're looking at several tens of thousands of pounds just to design a little board.
Yep.
And then you've got your manufacturing costs on top of that, and because you're going to be doing fairly low rate production runs, it's going to be fairly expensive because you're not going to get the quantities required to bring down the pricing.
Well, Leviathan, Jeftron have just announced today that their prices are going to have to go up because they just can't get raw materials.
Yeah, well, that's an industry-wide thing at the moment for electronics. There's a whole shortage of it because there aren't that many silicon chip fabrication plants in the world, and some of them burnt down recently, which is causing havoc everywhere. Which is not just in airsoft and hobby. It's like UK car manufacturers are having to stop manufacturing cars because they can't get the computer chips in to put in them. If it's affecting them, it's certainly going to affect airsoft.
So I think innovation-wise, potentially there's a skill gap. I think if you're a particularly talented engineer, you're unlikely, unless you're incredibly passionate, to go and work in airsoft. You'll be in aerospace or racing or automotive rather than making RC parts, which effectively is what airsoft is. I'm not saying there aren't talented engineers in airsoft, but I think it's unlikely the best of the best are going to be in that industry because it's just not going to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing. Again, because it's such a small sector, it can't afford the overhead costs to pay your kind of top level engineers top dollar to be able to keep them. That's the thing. Like engineers are the demand for engineers is far outstripping the supply of engineers. So, of course, people are going to move around, and we've seen that. Like G&G have said before, like we are having to delay the launch of this product because we do not have the engineering staff to work on this project.
I did my waiting. 12 years of it.
Well, that's it. So then you get a situation where it's much easier to develop an existing product than it is to create a new one. So you get developments of existing stuff, which you can kind of muddle around with a bit, rather than spending a lot of money. There's also, again, as a small industry, there's not a lot of money in it. So the risk-reward equation can be quite limited. So when a company's dripping in cash, they can afford to take a risk on a new product or a new technology and just see what happens. If you're not dripping in cash, you can't do that. It's too risky.
You've got to play it safe.
That project could put you under.
Yeah. So it's like it's why we see with, again, I'm coming back to G&G, their 308 MBR rifles that they launched recently. and there's about 20 different versions of them, and all of them are just slightly different rail lengths, because that's really cheap and easy to do, because I'm assuming they just get one long extrusion, and they just go, okay, we'll cut this length, and this length, and this length.
Well, they cut different holes in it. To be fair, anyone can do it. Any idiot like me can fire up fusion and cut holes in an extrusion.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's that's fairly safe, and it means that they can get their portfolio. It doesn't seem like they're a really big production house, because they're producing like 50 different rifles, but they're all actually the same base rifle with just different parts bolted onto it.
Well, particularly if you've got your fixed geometry, so you've got your fixed geometry of your gearbox and how it interacts with a hop. If you know what that is and that works, you can then iterate around that fairly safely. You can build stuff around that shell, around that hop-up unit. Obviously, the relationship between the hop and the hop unit and the gearbox is critical. But once you've got that nailed, you can build things around it. But even then, it's difficult. So if we go on to we're talking about the kind of risk-reward stuff, it's production engineering is very difficult. It's very easy it's not easy, but you can CNC machine something, a prototype. But when you go to production, and particularly if you zinc die casting or anything along those lines, you've got a whole world of pain with shrinkage and wall thicknesses and everything else to deal with, and it might just not work. Or you need to do multiple mold changes, unless you spend a lot of money on analysis and a really good mold engineer. But again, that's expensive in the first place.
Exactly. I've heard rumours that a lot of gearboxes in the industry are all kind of based off hand-me-down casts from other manufacturers. So that's why we see kind of lower-end gearboxes have kind of, some of them have quite dodgy QC. It's because they're using fairly worn-out moulds that they're getting for fairly cheap, either by, legitimately buying it off the company, or walking past their bins and going, oh, those look like V2 gearbox molds.
Well, a lot of people are molding for each other. There's much less OEMs than there are actual manufacturers.
Yes.
So some of those molds are probably quite tired, but again, how difficult are they to recut? Probably not difficult. But then every time you recut or you do something else, are you changing the dimensions slightly? Where do those original dimensions came from? And they come from, and certainly in terms of a V2 gearbox, they come from Toko Marui back in the early 90s.
Yeah, so I was trying to do some research for this to figure out when it actually launched, and funnily enough, Wikipedia does not have all that much information on it, nor does the Toko Marui website. Or it probably does, but I can't read it because I'm not fluent in
Japanese, so you can't read it anyway.
But according to some YouTube sources, the original trailer, the really cool retro trailer for the M16 launch, was released in 1991. So let's say V2 Gearbox came about in 1991. And that gearbox has served now for 30 years. So just for reference, what was going on back in 91?
I was 14.
I was -4.
So, but fundamentally, when you ask the question about innovation in airsoft, for most gearboxes in most guns, there has not been an innovation since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every gearbox is pretty much based off the same system. It's the same 3 gears and either a long type or a short type motor, and just arranged in slightly different ways. So I have here a gearbox out of a GPMG. Oh look, there's a motor and there's 3 gears in it. It's the same thing. Like the mechanical drivetrain of airsoft gearboxes is exactly the same. And even, we were saying earlier, the GBLS system is pretty much exactly the same drivetrain. It's 3 gears pulling back a spring. Now, admittedly, it's pulling back the whole bolt carrier group, and then there's some other bits going on to hold the piston back. But fundamentally, it's 3 gears pulling back a spring and compressing it and ready to release it.
And I've got one in for long-term test. I really like it. I didn't think I would, but I do. And so there's some innovative stuff with it, with the way the BCG interacts with the lower gearbox. But the lower gearbox fundamentally has the motor in the same position, and I think it has 3 gears. I could be incorrect, but certainly the basics of it are the same as a V2 gearbox. The upper half is much more interesting.
Yeah. And Yeah, and it's still a motor and the pistol grip arrangement. Yeah, so it's still using the stock well, not stock, but the standard motor design.
You can put standard motors in it. Yeah.
So yeah, it hasn't changed. So really, we've been sitting on the same design for 30 years. And in terms of technology, 30 years ago, phones, they were these big boxes on the street that you had to go in and use, or they were sat on a table in your house and you had to go over.
Yeah.
The internet was just about a thing back then. Now look at it. We're sitting here talking over the internet and uploading this video to the cloud for everyone to enjoy. That was
on personal computers, not on some crazy broadcast satellite link system.
Yeah.
And you've got a studio on your computer.
Yes. Yeah. And as I was saying, in terms of big history things, the Berlin Wall was still up back then. So a lot has changed in 30 years outside of Airsoft.
I think so. How we control the gearbox has changed a bit.
Yes.
But fundamentally, how the gearbox works has not changed in 30 years.
It's still the same 3 gears pulling back a spring. And as you were saying, there have been some kind of, I wouldn't say generational leaps, but small evolutionary steps. So we've seen more gearboxes starting to adopt quick change spring guides, and we've seen obviously in gearbox MOSFETs come around and become a thing, but the mechanics of it haven't evolved really. So that begs the question: where will it go next, or will it go anywhere next? And we might be seeing a glimpse of the future with Systema and Ares releasing their new gearbox designs, and as Ares so eloquently put it, defying new standards.
Chinglish.
I think I meant defining new standards, but so what is the kind of evolutionary step that we're seeing here with the Ares and Systema design? I'd say that the key thing is moving the motor into the gearbox. So we no longer need to have a big chunky motor. I have one. We no longer need to have a big chunky motor sitting in a pistol grip. Now it can all be inside the gearbox, which means the gearbox can be smaller, more compact, and hopefully could open up the idea of new design guns which couldn't originally use the current types of gearboxes we have. I'm really hoping we see someone crazy make an EM2, because I think that could work with that new gearbox design. And people have quite rightly said we could actually get an MP7 using a full cylinder volume, which would be nice to see.
Yep.
So there's a whole host of opportunities with it.
Right. Okay. So now I'm not an electronic engineer or motor guy, but I think this kind of comes back to the money thing again, and that drones and drone flying has been such a popular thing that has been millions upon millions, if not billions of pounds, invested and thrown into the development of these new motors over the last 10, 15 years, which has led to the development of these incredibly powerful, incredibly light, incredibly efficient little motors, which are only now coming into Airsoft. And it's really fascinating for someone like I'm not a particularly knowledgeable about this sort of stuff, but you can see the opportunity coming through. And in fact, but even then, is it that innovative? Because certainly in the Ares case, all they're really doing is replacing the spur gear itself with a motor.
I think that's quite a clever idea, because a lot of people are complaining. Well, I feel like whenever something new comes along, the first thing that happens is everyone goes, "Oh well, we're not going to see any kind of aftermarket support, and there's no compatibility with anything else." And unfortunately, sometimes to advance forwards, you need to, make this step and go, well, actually, all the stuff we're using is kind of old, and we should try something new.
Well, we talked about the GBLS earlier, which is completely proprietary.
Yeah.
The gearboxes, the motor, you can use other motors.
Yeah, okay.
But the gearbox is completely proprietary.
Yeah, and it's a really cool system, and I hope to see more of that happen, and hopefully the costs start to come down a bit. Because obviously GBLS is expensive because they're having to use completely bespoke custom parts, and they obviously don't have the manufacturing volume at the moment to drive the cost down. Hence why it's like £1,500 for a complete rifle with them. But that's £1,500 to put a big grin on your face.
So we talked earlier about something called convergent design, and convergent design happens a lot. Yes. That's why most four-door family saloons basically look the same. It's why most UCI-compliant road bicycles basically look the same. When you have a design problem and you have a bunch of materials and then you smash them together, your solutions generally will converge to a certain point and everything starts looking the same. Most passenger airliners look exactly the same.
Oh yeah. Like most people to the untrained eye will look up in the sky and go, "Oh, that's a jumbo jet." No matter what plane it is. It could be a 737. It could be a 747, which is the jumbo jet. It could be an A380. I'm just listing planes at this point. But yeah, that's the point. But they all look relatively the same.
They do, and the solution they've come to is largely the same. There's some variations in layout and engine size and the aerodynamics of the wings and stuff, but fundamentally it's the same solution. There's not a load of flying wings. There's not a load of weird biplane jet airliners. They've converged on a certain design solution based around a certain problem. And I think Systema and Ares have converged on a similar design solution, and they're not the same.
They're not.
Based around
and
the
this
same.
is the thing that really bugged me, and this is why we're making the video, is because Ares released theirs, and everyone went, "Oh, they've cloned the Systema gun." Systema gun. Anyone cloned.
Well, Systema are using their planetary gearbox.
Yeah, they're using a planetary gearbox, and
you might need to put a graphic up to explain the difference.
But... And it's kind of overlapping helical gears. It's a really elegant, cool design, and full credit to Systema. That is an epic bit of engineering going on there. But the Ares have not copied that. And when did Systema first release their Infinity gearbox?
Donkeys.
No.
Donkeys.
What this?
The new one. It's only a couple of months.
Yeah. We have a guess, by the way.
Hey.
One, right, spot.
Talk about convergent design. You specify a problem, you look around at what is available, and you go, right, fine, and you can see how it happened. Okay, let's use more different motor technology. Oh, brilliant! Oh, it's this big. Oh, where can we put that? Oh, it goes inside. It's really not.
They probably looked at it.
It's clever, but you can see the process they went down.
This looks about the same size as one of our current gears. How about we just drop it in there? And that's what they've done.
Yeah, and you can see them going, oh, and how much torque does this put out? Oh, really?
Sweet. Well, that's perfect. Yeah, don't.
Well, it's fiddle with the gear ratios a bit to get it to pull a piston, but that's fine. They can do that as well.
Yeah, and this is the thing. And that's pretty much what's happened. And all credit to Ares. What they've done is basically kept, at least from the images they've released, it looks like they've kept commonality with the Sector and Spur gears. So, in theory, that's a fairly good path to do upgrades on it, and hopefully we shall see other manufacturers pick up on that design cue and follow suit, and hopefully
unless they're having to use a proprietary gear ratio, but we'll see. But the other thing to talk about really is how long stuff takes to make and design and create, and so I highly doubt they pulled that out in the 2 months since Systema released their gearbox.
Absolutely, because bearing in mind that'll be 2 months from the photos being released for them to go look at that, and then exactly reverse engineer it to the point where they can then manufacture it themselves to the I call this a production prototype. It does look like a production prototype. It's not. This is not an early stage prototype.
No, it's not as rough as some of the stuff Systema were showing when they were which was like bits of machined aluminium plate with some stuff stuck on it. This does look like it's come off a die-casting machine.
So for them to do that, they either had to have 100 engineers working 24/7, and be paying ludicrous amounts of money to get the machining up and running to be able to produce a production prototype, or they might have had similar trains of thoughts at similar sort of times, or probably actually Ares had the idea a bit after Systema, because I bet you Systema put in quite a few years of research work into their design.
Yeah, well, it's also they're both of them have a microprocessor control.
Well, they have to be for brushless. So
you can't do that fast either. unless you
turning around the electronics part of it will be quite a considerable amount of time, especially if you want to try and maximise the torque out of it. Because to maximise the torque out of a brushless motor, you need to be monitoring its position and know getting feedback from it to be able to then figure out what coils you should pulse. I mean, if you want to, we could go super nerdy and I could talk about how brushless motors work. But,
I think we probably should just, if you can do like a précis, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
Just because I think we're talking about technologies, and I think a lot of people,
okay, so
including myself, hear the words but don't actually understand what's going on.
Okay, so start off. Let's talk about brushed motors, which is what we currently have, and I'm sure anyone who's had a motor die and tried to figure out why will have seen these. So effectively, and if you've done GCSE physics, you probably had to build a basic version of this. Effectively, you have a coil, and then you have your two ends of the coil coming off onto what we call a stator, and effectively it's two C-shaped bits of metal with a bit of a gap in between them, and those are either end of your coil. And then you have two sprung-loaded brushes that push up against those stators, and as they spin, the current alternates which way round in the coil is flowing as those two C's switch over on the brushes. And then you have your permanent magnets around the outside of your rotor, and depending on which way the current's flowing, it will either push or pull against those magnets, thus generating rotation or energy, thus spinning your motor and giving you, power to use to spin gears and pull pistons. In a brushless motor, you don't have brushes, and the way most of them work, in these cases they're probably using what we call outrunners, so there are alternating permanent magnets all the way around the outside of the drum, and the drum spins. And on the inside you have fixed coils which you can pulse in sets on and off, and then those pull the magnets round. So the magnets kind of follow the field generated by your coils round.
It's almost inside out.
And sometimes they're referred to as three-phase motors because effectively to drive most of these, they have three wires and you put three-phase AC into them. So you have three offset sine waves at 120 degrees out of phase of each other, and and then it'll pull it round. And what you can do is, if you're smart with how you measure it, you can look at the position of the magnets and optimally pulse your coils to give you more torque. So you can effectively, as it moves between two coils, you can pull on one and push on the other to properly kick it round and hold it in positions. So you can generate a lot of torque at low revs, which is something you can't really do with brush motors. And I mean, there's a whole load of research going into brushless motors at the moment, especially not just for hobby stuff, but for electric cars.
Yeah, which is obviously the big ticket thing at the moment.
Yeah, and we can see that brushless motors have a lot of torque by the insane acceleration speeds of like Teslas. That's all just because they've got smart motor control. And if we can apply that to gearboxes, we might even get to the point where we can just have a motor directly driving your piston back and forward, which would be quite cool. And then it'd be very small. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways of doing it that make it smaller, but that's beyond, well, it's not beyond the scope, it would be an innovation in Airsoft, but I guess it's beyond what we want to talk about today.
Okay, so, and also I think, but what Ben's just outlined is a complex process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not really something, so they've either hired someone or someone's done a lot of work behind the scenes in understanding all this, and they've probably gone to an electronics consultancy and said we need to do this. So this is not something you do in 3 months and then build a board and then everything else. You can obviously build test boards, and then program it. So this is not a short process. I would anticipate, I don't know, most of the projects I've worked on, 18 months to 2 years for something like this, without any trouble at all. Particularly for volume production, because you've got all the snags. Systema don't really make that many guns.
No.
And same as GBLS, they don't really make that many. Most of their stuff is pretty much individually machined and hand assembled. Obviously, they're all hand assembled, but very carefully assembled. Yeah. Whereas areas are going to make a lot, relative terms, actually probably not a lot, but compared to GBLS and Systema, they're going to make a lot more.
Yeah.
And that brings its own issues. You can't hand fit this sort of stuff. It's just got to work. and it's got to be able to be assembled by non-skilled people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. It's got to be to the point. They've got to go away from designing to work to design for manufacture, which is the big thing, because you can design something that's beautiful and lovely and really, really complex, and that means it's going to be really, really expensive to make because it's going to take a lot of time and skilled labour to assemble it. Whereas really, in Airsoft, what they want to design it for is to have a bunch of Japanese housewives come in and assemble it, as Tokyo Marui have.
And it's also got to be reliable. It's got to work. It's got to be fairly robust. It's got to be, it's got to work, and you've got to test it properly to make sure it works in circumstances out of your control.
And it's got to be fairly airsoft proof, which is.
Forgotten Weapons did a good video on this quite recently, actually, talking about why firearms things don't really innovate and why they take a long time, and it's very similar stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's been any hugely innovative firearms in the main firearms industry for many years. Most of them are just respins of current existing working designs, like as in pretty much all NATO firearms other than the AR platform are all derived off the AR-18 in various guises.
Which is what, 60s?
50s, I think.
So old. But yeah, so it's so yeah. I don't think people saying they've just copied it. No. I think it's a case of convergent design. Yeah. Quite simply, that technology is getting more accessible, therefore it's going to get used.
We've now got Systema versus Ares. Are either of them going to become the industry standard, or do you think they're both going to be seen as just gimmick and we're going to stick with 30-year-old tech?
I doubt the Systema will, simply because of the gearing system, and I think they've got patents. The Ares might. I can see that happening. So Ben, I don't really know about how much drone rotor motors or outrunner
motors
cost. So let's, for example, what would one about the size of a bevel gear cost? To me as a consumer.
Well, back when I was building my drone, they were about 30 to 40 quid, but that was almost 10 years ago now. Now they are, drumroll please, £6.94 to a consumer as well.
To a consumer. £6. Jesus cross.
But you've also got to factor in, you then have to have electronics to control that, which will drive the cost up a bit. But I mean, that's probably going to be in the order of £10 for that.
So I reckon, Ben, in answer to your question, yes, I think that's going to be the industry standard.
Yep, I think so.
But that is, going right back to the beginning, that is investment and volume of production doing that.
Absolutely. It's just driving the price down because they're becoming more and more used, and there's so much research and development going into motors. And the interesting thing is, most of these new brushless motors use rare earth magnets, and currently most of the world's supply of rare earth magnets come from China. So if the way the world is going at the moment continues to go, maybe we'll see the brushless motor price go up massively as more and more trade embargoes are put in place. Yep. So it's, who knows what's going to happen. But if prices stay like they are, or can continue on the current trend, brushless motors are probably going to be the future of airsoft, which is quite cool to see.
I think based on that makes a lot of sense, and also means they can go into relatively low cost replicas. You're not looking at £1,000, £500 super special ones. They can go into relatively low cost, at probably entry level. Yep. Next step replicas, and also once those electronic, as you say, if the electronic boards are either an off the shelf or an easily adapted version, again that'll drive the cost. If they could use a motor controller from a drone. Yep. With a bit of reprogramming, again, there's millions upon millions of those things being made, so the cost of that will be relatively low. I think using commercial tech off the shelf is got to be the way forward.
Well, COTS is a very big thing at the moment in the industry. I guess in the industries I work in, it's all about, can we get the cost down using commercial off the shelf equipment and parts. So provided you don't have to custom design things, you can really, really cut down your development time, therefore cut down your development costs, ergo cheaper end product. So Hopefully.
I think we've just answered the question.
Yes. So, Tom, it sounds like the future is bright and the future is brushless. So, I for one, am looking forward to seeing it. They also sound nicer. Less gears in the gear chain means less noise. So we're going to get faster, snappier guns that sound nicer.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I think I look forward to seeing what the personally probably the second wave of products looks like. But certainly I think it's great, and it's really good to see some stuff actually happening and things moving on in Airsoft after 30 years.
Yeah. I don't know how much of the original advert I can put into this video without being flagged for copyright, but I think it's cool to see that we've gone from this
オートマチック電動ガンにホースはない。ゲームでの機敏な動きが勝利につながる。
to this. So, thank you all for joining us on this lovely ramblings about innovation in Airsoft. I hope you have enjoyed our discussion. We've been recording for over an hour now, but I'm sure magic editing me will cut this down to about 3 seconds worth of usable content. Let us know in the comments below what you think. Do you think brushless is going to be the future, or do you think we've just chalked a whole load of bollocks and we're going to stick with the good old-fashioned mechanical gearbox? So, if you haven't already, do consider subscribing to Tom's channel. It is great. It's very informative, and at the moment he's just showing us off all of his lovely kit that he has bought over the last, 20 years? Or 20 minutes?
Yeah, thank you, Green Surplus.
Yes.
So we've got some more loadout videos coming up that are unbelievably popular. We're still a bit amazed that people want to listen to us talking about kit, but we seem to have found a nice format that people like, and we'll carry on with our normal kind of reviews and tech and range stuff as well.
Yes. Have you got any good reviews in the pipeline?
I've got Leviathan MOSFET, talking about innovation. Just done an installation video I'm working on. I've got some Warhead brushless motors. That's the kind of standard traditional type. Just in to play with as well. I've got my GB-less DAS review. That's pretty much all filmed now. I need to edit that together. So there's some complementary stuff to what we've just been talking about coming up.
I look forward to watching that. Really interested in the unbiased review we're going to be doing of the Warhead motors, because are they worth the money?
Well, I'm going to put them, here's a little preview for you guys. I'm going to put one into my Marui Mark 18, which has got a Titan in it. See how well it plays with an FCU. And the other one is going into my Systema high-speed MP5.
Cool.
So I'll do before and after. We'll get all the stats on it, and we'll see how they run.
Have you got any kind of what would be industry-leading standard motors to compare against?
I don't have any of the really big boys. So I've got a couple of ASGs. I've got some kind of the standard rocket high torques and everything else as well.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah, it'll be a pretty good review to watch. Looking forward to it. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for Tom for joining me today and shooting the proverbial poo with me over this. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all again at some point when I make another video, hopefully soon. Goodbye.